In the fall of 1974, the White House ordered up buttons. Some 12 million of them went into production, small and round and red on white, stamped with one three-letter word, WIN. Pinned to lapels from the president on down, they carried the entire official anti-inflation strategy of the world's largest economy. Not a price control, not an interest rate, a button. At that moment, the price of a pound of sugar had roughly quadrupled in about a year, from around 15 cents to about 65 cents, and consumer prices overall were climbing at better than 12% a year. Washington's answer was to ask American households to whip inflation with willpower. This is the story of what that campaign actually asked a family budget to do, why more than 100,000 Americans enlisted in its first week anyway, and how quickly Washington stopped saying the word once the enemy changed. To understand why anyone reached for a button, look at the year it landed in. Because 1974 hit the American household budget from every direction at once. The Arab oil embargo had ended in March, but gasoline was still up more than 40% from 2 years before. Grocery prices had been rising so fast that the year before, in April of 1973, millions of households had boycotted meat for a week in protest. And in August of 1974, in the middle of all of it, Richard Nixon resigned the presidency over Watergate, and Vice President Gerald Ford was sworn in without ever having been elected to the office. Ford inherited a consumer price index rising by annual average at the fastest pace since 1947, a stock market down almost by half, and a public still reeling from Watergate. He decided within weeks that inflation would be his fight. In his first major address, he called inflation domestic public enemy number one. What came next was among the strangest economic policy campaigns of the post-war era. And the strangeness is worth taking seriously because it tells you what the government believed a household could do about inflation and what it could not admit. Through late September, Ford convened a conference on inflation in Washington, 2 days of the country's leading economists arguing in front of him about what was driving prices. They did not agree. And so, on October the 8th, 1974, Ford stood before a joint session of Congress and gave the speech the whole campaign is named for. We must, he said, whip inflation right now. On his lapel, as he said it, was the button, "Weigh in for whip inflation now." The speech did contain conventional policy. Ford asked Congress for a 1-year 5% surtax on corporations and upper incomes, spending restraint, and measures on energy supply. But that is not what anyone remembered, then or now, because the heart of the program was aimed somewhere else entirely, at the household. Ford asked Americans to drive less and carpool more, to turn down thermostats, to waste less food, and in a phrase that startled even his own staff, to clean up their plates. He asked families to plant vegetable gardens, quickly nicknamed Twin Gardens, a deliberate echo of the Victory Gardens of the Second World War, when 20 million backyard plots had helped feed a country at war. And he asked every American, in the campaign's own word, to enlist. A form ran in newspapers across the country, addressed directly to the president, and it read, "Dear President Ford, I enlist as an inflation fighter and energy saver for the duration. I will do the very best I can for America." Sign it, clip it, mail it to the White House, and a win button came back. Within a little more than a week, over 100,000 signed forms had reached the White House, and by the end of the year, the count stood near 200,000. A Citizens Action Committee to fight inflation was chartered to run the crusade, and its chair was not a politician, but one of the most widely read household money voices in America, Sylvia Porter, the syndicated financial columnist whose money advice ran in hundreds of newspapers and whose readers were the families keeping ledgers at kitchen tables. The committee put out lists of ways a household could fight inflation. shop with a list, compare unit prices, mend clothes, share rides, bank the savings. None of it was bad advice, and that is precisely the trap. Every line of it was something households in 1974 were already doing, not as a patriotic campaign, but as triage. Now set the pledge against the arithmetic it was supposed to defeat. The median American family earned about $12,800 in 1974. Consumer prices rose better than 12% that year, which means a family whose income stood still lost roughly $1 of every 8 to inflation, over $1,500 of purchasing power, gone without a single act of carelessness. Against that, consider the garden. A well-tended backyard plot could genuinely trim a produce bill, real dollars, worth real work. But it stood against a grocery ledger where sugar had gone from about 15 cents a pound to about 65, and where the meat counter had already provoked a national boycott. A household could do every single item on the committee's list perfectly for a year, and the 12% would still be there the next morning, because the 12% did not come from wasted leftovers. It came from an oil embargo, a collapsed harvest cycle, a decade of easy money, and a dollar that had been cut loose from gold 3 years earlier. The campaign asked the family ledger to absorb a monetary event. I think that is the most honest way to read it. Washington was asking a bucket to bail out a tide, and people knew. The mockery started almost immediately, and it came from every direction. Union leaders dismissed the program outright as a substitute for policy. Comedians wore the buttons upside down so that wine read NIM, which they said stood for No Immediate Miracles. Newspaper columnists pointed out that the same season the president was asking families to clean their plates, wholesale prices were still posting double-digit gains. And inside the White House, the skepticism ran deepest of all. The chairman of Ford's own Council of Economic Advisors, a young economist named Alan Greenspan, later recalled in his memoir that when the buttons were unveiled, his private reaction was 2 words that have followed the program ever since: unbelievably stupid. That is not a critic talking, or an opponent from the other party. That is the president's own chief economist describing the president's own program. Yet here is the part that deserves more respect than the joke version of this story allows, and it is the reason this episode belongs on a channel about household ledgers. 200,000 ordinary people signed that pledge in earnest, more than 100,000 of them in the very first week. Gerald and Betty Ford signed one themselves, pledging to buy, when possible, only products and services priced at or below present levels. The president had enlisted in his own campaign, and the people who mailed in their forms were not fools. They mailed the form because it was the first time in 3 punishing years that anyone in Washington had spoken to them as if their thrift mattered, as if the discipline they were already practicing at the kitchen table, the mended clothes, the stretched casseroles, the coupon drawer, the carpool, was part of the national fight rather than a private humiliation. The pledge did not change the consumer price index by 1/10 of a point, but it named something real. By late 1974, the American household was already running some of the most disciplined budgets of the post-war era because it had no choice. The campaign did not create that discipline. It borrowed it. A president facing a problem his tools could not quickly fix reached for the one resource that was still abundant, the seriousness of ordinary families, and pinned a button on it. Then the enemy changed, and everything that follows turns on it. Even as Ford spoke in October, the economy was not merely inflating, it was falling. The recession that had begun quietly in late 1973 was, by the winter, becoming the deepest since the 1930s. Factories cut shifts. The unemployment rate, 5.5% in the summer, had reached 6% in the very month of the speech, and it was climbing toward a peak of 9% by May of 1975. And that put the White House in an impossible position, because everything Wynne asked households to do, spend less, consume less, tighten further, is precisely what deepens a recession. Asking a country sliding into a slump to whip inflation by not spending was, by the winter, the exact opposite of what the economy needed. The program was not repealed or canceled. It simply stopped being mentioned. By January of 1975, Ford stood before Congress again, and the message had inverted. The state of the union, he said, is not good. Unemployment, not inflation, was now the emergency. And the president, who 3 months earlier had asked for a surtax, now asked for a tax cut, which he signed that March as the Tax Reduction Act of 1975. The buttons went into drawers. The great citizen mobilization against inflation had lasted as a living campaign, roughly 1 season. So what was win, really, in the terms of this channel, in the terms of a ledger? Strip away the mockery and the button becomes legible as something governments have reached for in every monetary crisis. A transfer of responsibility, moved by ceremony, from the institutions that manage money to the households that merely use it. Inflation in 1974 was made in the places a family could not reach, in oil ministries and grain markets, and the Federal Reserve, and the long shadow of the day in 1971 when the dollar left gold. But it was experienced in the one place a family could see, the ledger, and so that is where the government pointed. The campaign treated a symptom sheet as a cause. It is an instinct that has never gone away. Whenever prices run, someone official will eventually point at the family ledger. And the households, who understood their own ledgers better than Washington did, mostly took the button, wore it or did not, and went on doing the quiet arithmetic they had been doing all along. Arithmetic that never needed a slogan. Inflation did eventually come down years later, and willpower never touched it. It was broken by interest rates near 20%, a policy with costs no button ever mentioned. What remains of the season America tried to defeat inflation by enlistment is mostly the buttons themselves. You can still buy one for a few dollars, a small red and white souvenir of the year. The government looked at some of the hardest pressed family budgets of the post-war era and asked them politely to try harder. If your family kept one of those buttons or one of those ledgers, the comments are where those stories get saved.